when WWE inevitably buys AEW in a couple of years down the line, will it be, or do you think it's fair to say that Chris Jericho's feud with Orange Cassidy was what really began the fall and the demise of All Elite Wrestling?
I think that will undoubtedly be the case. You know, you're going to see this documentary on Peacock, because by then in Australia, you'll have Peacock too. And we're going to have Ricochet talking, and Ricochet is going to be like, oh my God, I remember when AEW started. It was this big deal. And then 6 months in, they had their best wrestler feud with Orange Cassidy, and things went downhill. You know, we're going to get like R-Truth, Ali. We're going to get all these WWE guys commenting about the rise and fall of AEW, and they're just, WWE is going to pinpoint it to Jericho and Orange Cassidy. So
there'll be a shoot interview of like Tony Khan, like, you know, uncensored, talking about how terrible Mike Tyson was to work with, how Tyson didn't want to wrestle Jericho, so he had to throw him Orange Cassidy instead, and how it caused the downfall of their promotion. Like,
isn't it amazing that the headlock, oh, not the headlock, that confrontation with Mike Tyson and Jericho led to nothing? Just still amazing. It still boggles my mind.
I remember when that happened, I was just like, my God, this is kind of cool. They're doing a 1998 Raw is War all over again, 2020. Like, wow. And then
what was the segment next week? What was the segment next week? It was Jericho throwing orange pulp at Orange Cassidy. He had like a bag of oranges.
Jericho in the ring with the inner circle, cutting a promo, and then Orange Cassidy comes in the crowd, puts his thumb up, then puts his thumb down, and orange pulp just falls from the ceiling on Jericho.
Wow. Oh my God.
Anyway, this is episode, I believe, 19 of Elite Heat. This is Chris Jericho, the king of reinvention. So with that intro aside, we spent literally the best part of 2 hours last episode praising the first 28 years of Chris Jericho's career, Kevin. It was a bit of fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, now we get to talk about, you know, the modern day Jericho, the demo god, or Le Champion, or however you choose to remember him in this modern coronation. But yeah, this is what we're going to talk about. It's going to be all about what he's done the last 3 or so years.
Yeah, because legitimately, literally since 2018 on, Chris Jericho, the amount of stuff there is to cover with this guy, like, not that there wasn't stuff to cover, because we covered a 27-year legendary career in like nearly 2 hours last episode. But with this one, we're probably going to go near enough the same amount of time discussing his more recent stuff, because quite literally, Kevin, when it comes to Chris Jericho in the past 3-4 years alone, I mean, where do you begin? You've got political controversies. There's the stuff with masks. There's him being cancelled many times, being the leader of the new wrestling company that's going to take down the Evil E. You've got him in Japan. You've got him with his new stable, him versus Mike Tyson and all this kind of stuff. Kevin, where do we begin?
Well, I guess the proper point to begin would be November 5th, 2017, when Jericho showed up on a vignette in Japan and challenged Kenny Omega to a match at Wrestle Kingdom. Like, that's really, when you think about it, that kind of started this madness. Like, there was already a bit of a buzz on the indie scene. You know, Cody Rhodes, Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, they were already building some steam. And then it was like Jericho just ignited, you know, he just ignited the fire, and it caused an explosion, right, in the indie scene when he showed up in New Japan. Like, I think that's the right place to start.
Hell yeah. I mean, like, when this happened, it caused an explosion, okay? It caused a Dave Meltzer explosion, pal. This thing, legit. I mean, Jericho and Omega, Tokyo Dome, 2018, big match. I mean, literally, they're doing this whole thing with Jericho and Kenny Omega. You've got Omega, who by this point is New Japan's biggest star, if not like top two, depending on how you see Okada and Omega, like, comparatively. And you've got Chris Jericho, a guy who everyone the world over knows, because he, by this point, been around for 27 years, and 20 of those have been in a mainstream, you know, national TV, you know, sense. So Chris Jericho, Omega, they do the match at Wrestle Kingdom 12, Kevin. Have you seen this match? If so, thoughts?
I've seen it a couple times, actually. And I think it's probably Jericho's best match. Like, it might, I mean, you could argue, obviously, his matches with Shawn Michaels, his matches with Benoit. But for me, this is my favorite Jericho match. I just think everything kind of coordinated. Like, this was Jericho out to prove that he could have a quote-unquote 5-star match. You know, and this was, like, I believe this was the first one that Meltzer gave 5 stars. I mean, that doesn't really hold a lot with me, but I know it does with a lot of people. And I mean, it had the big fight feel. You know, it felt like the Alpha versus Omega. It really felt like a big deal. That's really what I remember most about it.
Yeah, I mean, because as I say, if you got Chris Jericho against Kenny Omega in the Tokyo Dome, it's like the crossover appeal there was really good because you got Jericho, who's a world over star from America essentially. Like, yeah, he had his indie career, which you covered in the past episode, but like you got this guy with such notoriety. Wrestles Omega, the match itself in the ring, bell to bell. You talked about it there. Jericho's best work. I mean, really outside of the Shawn stuff, I feel like. Because I mean, when you take Prime Jericho and have him versus Shawn Michaels, I mean, I think the match was better, barely. But like, I mean, this for a 2018 Chris Jericho match. At this point, Chris Jericho is 47 basically, and you got him wrestling such a great match against Omega, which it goes to show you the talents of Kenny Omega. I mean, I think that's fair.
Absolutely, yeah, that's 100% fair to say. This match did big business for New Japan. This match kind of spearheaded New Japan's expansion into the United States. And then Kenny Omega and Jericho were like, yeah, we're going to AEW, pal. Tony Khan has given us, fat checks. So there goes that. But that's another topic for another day. But it definitely spearheaded New Japan's, expansion to the United States, expansion to just outside of Japan. And Jericho, I mean, it's been a big part of it. And he would kind of foreshadow what he would do with AEW. But like this New Japan stuff, I just remember how shocking it was because Jericho had said in his podcast that he would never wrestle for another promoter other than Vince McMahon again. And then he came back and he was like, oh, I'll never wrestle for another promoter on American soil or something, And then I was like, all right, you get it. You're full of crap. Like, we know you're going to be at All In. We know you're going to be at All In. We know you're going to be doing other New Japan shows. The crazy thing to me, though, was like, he wrestles this match against Naito, I believe it was, in June of 2018. And then he was on the Greatest Royal Rumble, like what, a month prior?
Yeah, it was a weird one. That it was like a really blurry gray area because the Jericho Omega thing was like a one of its kind pioneering, like, oh my god, Jericho's going to Japan when he's like under WWE contract. And like the whole thing arranged between Jericho and Vince was this is a one and done. This is all Jericho's doing there. But then literally the night after Wrestle Kingdom at New Year Dash, you've literally got Jericho attacking Naito. And then like Vince calls him up and's like, oh, damn it, pal. What is this? That was a one and done, pal. What the hell are you doing? And then Jericho's like, people are talking about it. I'm a WWE wrestler. Makes money, Vince. And Vince is like, well, that's what I like to hear, pal. Keep making that money for me. Like, that's essentially the kind of crux of the conversation. Jericho, the stuff with like Naito, I mean, once again, Jericho doing really good work in Japan as well. But as you mentioned there, Kevin, it's that whole thing of, well, he's in WWE, he's doing stuff in Japan as well. No one's ever really done this. Like, it was Jericho trailblazing, doing something that we hadn't seen before, changing the game. Because, I mean, once again, at this point, Kevin, we've seen near enough everything in wrestling. This is 2018 by this point. Literally every segment, storyline, angle, everything we've seen. But this, we haven't. We hadn't seen a guy with the namesake of Chris Jericho having such a big crossover into New Japan, like crazy.
It made New Japan kind of mainstream in a lot of respects. Like it was just like, especially in the States, there was just a lot more people that were wrestling fans, WWE fans, that were paying attention to what was going on in Japan. They were like, oh, I got to watch that Jericho Omega match. And then, some people got hooked. Some people left it for what it was after Jericho left. But we saw different instances of this. Like we saw Matt Hardy when he was still contracted with WWE. He showed up at a Ring of Honor show, right? He and Jeff Hardy. They showed up at a Ring of Honor show or some indie show because they had prior commitments in 2017 when they returned. And that was like, okay, it's just a random indie show, whatever, what have you. There was a time that Vince traded Christian for Ric Flair so Ric Flair could do the Hall of Fame when he was in TNA, and Christian showed up at a TNA show. But it's Christian and it's TNA. It was just, it wasn't that big of a deal. And then this one was really just, it was crazy. It was just, I don't even know how you could word it, right? Like, it was just so shocking, I think is probably the best word, but it feels like an understatement.
Well, yeah, also the other one that people might mention is, Hulk Hogan wrestled in Japan as well. It's like, they didn't promote that on WWF TV. They're like, you didn't have Vince McMahon being like, go check out New Japan Pro Wrestling. Go watch our biggest star, Hulk Hogan, have a great match with Kaiji Muto. Like, they weren't doing that, So it's like, Yeah, Hogan wrestled in Japan, but once again, you mentioned Christian there. Like these crossovers, none of them were done the way Chris Jericho's one was. Chris Jericho's New Japan crossover in 2018, and then literally leading in 2019 and whatnot, we hadn't seen anything like it. So in that regard, Jericho the Trailblazer, Jericho the Pioneer, the stuff with Omega, the stuff with Naito, just all of it. Like
Absolutely.
Jericho was entrenched in the fabric of New Japan Pro Wrestling in 2018. Even though, as you say, he was involved and was set to wrestle at the Greatest Royal Rumble against The Undertaker, but that just got scrapped. It's just wild.
Yeah, he ended up showing up as like the final entrant in the 50-man Royal Rumble, and that was still a surprise because it was like, well, everybody knew at that point that he was going to wrestle Naito. They had announced it already. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he had just attacked Naito right after the Royal Rumble, the Greatest Royal Rumble,
right around the same time.
Like a week later or something, and he attacks Naito at the show, and it's like, oh, they're gonna wrestle at Dominion, New Japan's second biggest pay-per-view. It's crazy. And then I think Jericho kind of realized too, like, oh wow, I'm kind of a draw. Like he realized, like, all these years of Vince telling him, oh, you're not as big as Austin and Rock. It's like, well, maybe I am bigger. Or look what I did for Japan. Look what I did for this. Look what I did for that. So Jericho was like, I don't really want to go back to WWE. What am I going to go back to WWE for? To be wrestling Kevin Owens in the opening match of WrestleMania again? Like, I could do more.
Hell yeah. Like, I mean, that's one of the things Jericho's talked about as well. It's like, he didn't want to be a parody of his former self. Because, like, that's one of the things, I mean, Jericho's no idiot. He sees how guys like, I mean, you take your pick in the last 10 years of WWE, Kevin. Kurt Angle, let's use him for an example. All-time great, one of like the best. I don't know where you want to rank him all time. That's not a whole nother video in itself. But like one of the greatest of all time, Kurt Angle, he gets brought back, and all he does is say, "It's true. Let's have a good match." Shane McMahon, legendary daredevil, high-flying guy, he comes out. Let's have a great match. You have the Dudley Boys come back, legendary, famed tag team career, probably the greatest tag team of all time, if not top like 3. And then all they come back and say, "Get the tables." Like Jericho didn't want to just be coming out there in 2022 being like, the list of Jericho, stupid idiot, watch me click my pen. Like Jericho wanted to do something big. And you said it perfectly there. He wanted to test how much of a draw he was. Vince told him, oh, well, I mean, you're a star, obviously, Jericho. I trust you, Jericho, but you're not Cena. You're not Austin. And Jericho's like, I'm aware I'm not, but I want to at least see how good I can draw. See what I can do. And 2018 Japan, and I mean that was a big part of that. And that leads us into AEW, which we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, just Chris Jericho took a gamble on himself as he did throughout his whole career, and yet again paid off, Kevin.
Absolutely. I think that really the next big thing that we need to talk about is All In. Did you watch All In? Were you like keeping up with it? Were you checking results? Like, where were you around the time that All In was announced and the time that it was airing? Like, where were you in that whole time frame?
Now, I'd be completely lying through my teeth if I said I was watching wrestling at the time. I was following the indie scene. I was aware of All In. By this point, 2018, I just didn't watch wrestling because I got, ever since about WrestleMania 33, I was like, I can't do this. Like, this is not it. So I just tuned out. And then when I got back into wrestling in mid 2019, I called myself back up with basically everything. All In was a big thing because All In, in case you aren't aware, essentially, basically, I mean, you can tell the story in probably better detail than I can, but basically, WWE have had the monopoly conglomerate on pro wrestling for, God knows, like over 2 decades at this point. And then the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, Cody Rhodes, the indie wrestling scene, they all, came together basically to put on an indie wrestling supercard, which sold out, 15,000 people in an arena? And then this show was just, it really did lay the groundwork beautifully for All Elite Wrestling in many senses. Like, I've, to answer the question you asked before that, Kevin, I've gone back, I've watched most of All In. I mean, pretty good stuff across the board. Like, some of the stuff was not the greatest. Like, why was Stephen Amell there? But nonetheless, like, generally it was good. But yeah, very significant show, it's fair to say. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you have, Cody, I think it was Cody and the Young Bucks responded to a tweet from Dave Meltzer saying that, oh, Ring of Honor, they couldn't sell a 10,000 seat arena. And they were just like, all right, bet, hold my beer. And they went out and did it. And they got this massive show put together with, like, Okada was on it, Kenny Omega, the New Japan IWGP champion, Naito, I think, was on it. They had just a bunch of the best talent from New Japan, the best talent from the Indies, and then Jericho was getting bombarded in interviews by websites and podcasts, and they were like, "Oh, Jericho, you're going to be at this show. You just were wrestling Naito, this, that. You've been enshrined in New Japan. You're not contracted by WWE." And he was like, "Nope, I'm not wrestling in American soil for anybody but Vince. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to be at All In. I'm not going to be at All In." And then sure enough, Chris Jericho shows up at All In. He shows up disguised as Penta, and he attacks Kenny Omega. And this was at the time when All In was being promoted. All the guys at AEW, or all the guys that would be AEW, they knew AEW was coming. So it was like, we're going to build to Jericho and Omega as our first big pay-per-view, which ended up being Double or Nothing. And this was the beginning of that build. And I think a lot of people were still like, there was still, what's the word? There was still skepticism, right?
Yeah.
I would say, probably be the best way to say it, that these guys would start their own promotion. There were rumors that Jim Ross, Jericho, Tony Khan, the Young Bucks, they were all in on a new promotion. But then when Jericho showed up at All In, I think that kind of validated it, if you will. Like, that kind of showed like, oh, this is for real. Like, Jericho's not just going to show up at WWE. He's not going to be doing, it anymore. And just, like you said, doing the list, like, just out there playing his hits. And then it was just like, it was a moment in time in wrestling where things kind of stood still, I would say. The wrestling world was just ablaze. And I get why people are so passionate for AEW, because they felt like fans felt like they're being listened to, right? Like, that's probably the best way to say it. Like, All In was like catered directly to the fans.
Yeah, and like, I mean, to build on that, you have these people who, I mean, this is literally from like 2018 on. Like, this is a 2018 thing. People feel like they've seen from the ground up this promotion, So in that sense, people, feel deeply attached to it. They live by, like, oh my God, I saw the very foundations of this company. I'm watching them grow and prosper. Like, it's just great stuff, like, all around.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And, Jericho, then he goes on to do the Rock and Ranger Wrestling SC with Ring of Honor in October, right after All In. And then it was like, wow, there's big things happening. That was probably the most momentum Ring of Honor has ever had. I remember Ring of Honor got so big that I went to a Ring of Honor show down, like, locally, just because there was so much hype. It was like, oh, I want to see this, and I want to see what all the hype is about, what all the buzz is about. And I saw it for myself, and I was pretty impressed with what I saw. And then, I mean, it kind of wore out quickly, I think, that honeymoon feeling. But at first, it was really cool. And then Ring of Honor, they didn't want to shell out the money for the Young Bucks. They didn't want to shell out the money to pay Cody. They didn't want to shell out the money to pay Kenny. So they're like, all right, bet. We're going to start our own promotion.
That said, who did want to shell out the money, pal? Who wanted to dish out the money and start a promotion? Walk us through that, Kevin.
Yeah, exactly. So they were like, all right, bet. We're going to go to WWE, pal. And then somebody you may have heard of, who we're actually going to do a bio on coming up here on Elite Heat very soon, Tony Khan, the son of Shad Khan, the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Fulham Football Club. He comes in and he's like, I want a wrestling promotion. I want you, Chris Jericho. I want you, Young Bucks. And what do you know? We get this press conference in Jacksonville, Florida in January. What was that, like New Year's Day or something? A couple days, like, right into the new year. They had this BTE announcement.
January 8th. January 8th, they did the announcement.
Right, January 8th. So, okay, so January 1st, we have the Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, and Cody. They announced AEW. They show the logo, whatever. Their contracts had expired from Ring of Honor. They're all free agents. And then it was like, okay, what's next? And then Jericho shows up January 8th. And I think that's right. I think that's a pretty good place for us to pick up from here, right? This is Jericho's debuts in AEW. He's at this press conference. Well, what was his words where he was like, he said something like, I got the money already. I don't need the money. I want to be a part of history. I want to be a part of a revolution. And I would say the rest is history, right? Like, that started all right there, that Jericho press conference.
Hell yeah. I mean, wow. Like it's like, what a moment. Because one of the things with Jericho, I mean, we've been talking about his legacy for over 2 hours now, but really, you take this guy, he brings such a sense of, like, notoriety to all, like, AEW. Like Jericho, one of the things I've said, I mean, we'll go on to talk about his, like, world title run and whatnot. When you look at, like, the champions of AEW and, like, their roles and just generally their roles in the promotion, Chris Jericho in 2019 AEW, he was essentially not the godfather of AEW, but he was like the pioneer of getting AEW onto TNT, getting AEW that first big TV deal, getting AEW from just, oh, well, this is Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, Cody, and a rich family and just a wrestling promotion to, they've got Jericho. Oh, okay, I'll tune into that now. Jericho's someone I've known for 25 years. Like Jericho was a massive kind of linking point between the casual, disenfranchised WWE fan and the real diehard, I watch every wrestling show on the planet wrestling fan. So Jericho, he was so big in that regard. He was big in leading them onto TNT. Chris Jericho, I mean, his announcement at this press conference you talk about here, it was shocking. Like people, as we've talked about, for the last couple of minutes now, people had a feeling. I mean, his role in All In, his role with Japan, Jericho clearly wasn't infatuated with WWE come 2018, 2019. But to see him showing up at this AEW press conference, it was massive.
Absolutely. It was another thing where Jericho had just had a match at Wrestle Kingdom against Naito. And then it was okay, well, he's going to stay in New Japan or he's going back to WWE. He was like, nope, I'm not going to be there. I have nothing to do with this AEW company. Nothing, nope, nothing to do. And his appearance was shocking. Just for the simple fact that, there was speculation, but you didn't know for sure. And then when he debuts in this press conference, he gets in Kenny Omega's face. And it's wow, not only is Jericho here, but he's headlining Double or Nothing, the very first pay-per-view. And it's going to be against Kenny Omega. We're going to get, the rematch of all rematches in wrestling right now. This is probably the biggest dream match in the year of 2019, was Jericho and Omega on American soil. I think that's pretty fair to say.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, not that WWE was doing much in 2019, Kevin. My God,
Yeah, not a lot of competition. We were watching Dean Ambrose receive injections in January of 2019.
Yeah, that was when they were burying Ambrose on his way out, having him face off with Nia Jax on Raw, and
yeah, he's jobbing to Matt Hardy, jobbing to Randy Orton.
Yeah, Charlotte Flair being added to the WrestleMania match that people actually wanted to see, and you've got Kofi Mania was good for 6 weeks, and then after that it was just literally Kofi versus Ziggler for 2 pay-per-views. I mean, WWE was hardly setting the world ablaze at the time. I mean, infamously, Sami Zayn mentioned AEW on Raw, and that was a big oh my God, inside job type moment.
I remember that.
Oh God, we'll talk about that and much more in the Tony Khan bio in a couple of weeks. But nonetheless, Chris Jericho, Kenny Omega. I mean, the rematch itself, a Double or Nothing, it was huge. It was oh my God, this is the first AEW pay-per-view. There was so much intrigue to that show. I remember, Cody versus Dustin, and they had I believe it was the tag match. Was it Young Bucks and Lucha Bros that show?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. So you got just this well-rounded show, main evented by Jericho and Omega, who, as we talked about a moment ago, Omega, the biggest world-renowned star who's never really had a meaningful WWE career, and then Jericho, who's Jericho, as we've talked about. So they did this big match, really damn good stuff, 20-odd minutes. The crowd's hanging on every move. The crowd's going crazy. And then a certain Dean Ambrose happens to make an appearance, and it's just this incredible moment. He's standing there face to face with Jon Moxley, and it's this company has something going.
Yeah, let me say this real quick before we talk about Moxley. So you have this moment where it's they're building to this pay-per-view, but they have no TV deal yet. They hadn't even announced a TV deal. There were rumors that they had a TV deal, but they were building to Double or Nothing on YouTube, pretty much. It was all mini YouTube documentaries on AEW's channel, Twitter, Instagram stuff, Jericho's podcast. They weren't really doing much, and that's pretty magical. They sold out what? They sold out the tickets for the arena at Vegas in 5 minutes. They sold out a 12,000 seat arena. It's pretty crazy the way AEW did that, and I would say a lot of that is based on Jericho. What did you say?
God, yeah. And also, you mentioned that model there, no TV, but they used social media and literally every platform outside of TV to build that up and hype it up, which I think that's also significant in itself, because you look at the direction, just the world's going as far as TV is getting phased out. People aren't really watching TV anymore, so it's becoming more of a social media predominant emphasis. It's Jericho being the face of Double or Nothing, and this Jericho Omega match being the thing that really sells those tickets and really makes people care and makes 15,000 tickets sell out in 5 minutes. it's a yet another feather in the cap of Jericho. Like literally, they don't have a TV show to promote it, but because of Jericho's star power in the main event versus Omega, they sell out all those tickets through literally social media and the fact that we're doing Jericho Omega. Enough said. And people just buy those tickets. Like, that's nuts.
It is, exactly. And also on top of that too, Jericho was set to challenge Okada like 2 weeks after Double or Nothing in New Japan. So it was a combination of things, and it showed that wrestling outside of WWE has drawing power, and there's a thirst and there's an audience for this stuff. It was like everything it was like a perfect storm, I guess you could say, for AEW. The Okada stuff with Jericho happened at the right time. He started becoming the Painmaker. Right around this time when they're promoting
Painmaker. Do you want to quickly discuss that character for a moment, the Painmaker? Now, infamously, there's a few pictures of Jericho where he's got his. Well, first of all, before I discuss that, generally speaking, we talk about Jericho, the king of reinvention. This is another one of these things because Jericho, 2016, 2017, we went over this in detail. He was doing the list. He was doing It, Kevin. We discussed that already. But then Chris Jericho, he decides he wants to do something darker. He's going to Japan. He wants to change it up a bit because that's what Chris Jericho does. He wants to do something similar to 2008 Jericho, but just in a different form. So he creates the Painmaker. Just describe the Painmaker for me, Kevin. Walk me through the Painmaker.
I mean, he was like, what's the word? It was like he was a heavy metal lead singer, like a heavy metal band lead singer from the 90s. Like it was like he was like straight from Kiss. That's really the best way I can describe it. He had the black face paint. He came out with like a fedora. It was ridiculous and over the top. I guess in a great way. That's really the only way I can describe it. And then he was just like, Okada, I'm the Painmaker. And then Okada would come back at him in Japanese insults. And it was just, I don't even know. It was just a weird time to be a wrestling fan.
You're the Painmaker. I'm the Rainmaker, pal. It's like, oh wow,
yeah,
ratings.
Yeah. And people were loving it. Everybody's like, oh, Jericho's the Painmaker. Oh my god.
And then once again, I mean, you compare that to WWE's. WWE's having Seth Rollins coming out there saying, "I'm the man's man," and literally getting beaten up by Lacey Evans. So, not much competition, but nonetheless, we move on. So.
Yeah, let's talk about the Double or Nothing match for a second because I gotta cut you off.
Sure. Get your thoughts in there, yeah. Yeah.
I thought the match wasn't as good as their New Japan matches or the New Japan match. Yeah. I think you and I can both agree with that.
Definitely.
But Jericho winning was shocking. I think everybody thought going in that Omega was gonna win. Right? I think like I would say, like what did you think?
Well, I mean, this is Kenny Omega. You want to establish him on American soil. This is like the biggest. It was quite literally. It was the biggest non-WWE pay-per-view. I mean, I'm sure someone out there is going to try and argue TNA Bound for Glory one of these years was, but really, since WCW, honestly. So it was like the biggest non-WWE pay-per-view in North American soil in like 20 years. You'd think you're establishing Kenny Omega as the guy. You're having Kenny Omega beat Jericho. So they do the match, which wasn't as good as the Tokyo Dome one, but in fairness, that match was amazing. So comparing that to that, it's tough, the Double or Nothing match to beat the Tokyo Dome match, but they did a good job. It was a good match. Once again, worked well in the ring. Jericho and Omega have like good in-ring chemistry. Like it's not like Omega and Okada as people love to say, but they still work together pretty well. So they do the match. Jericho loses, and it's like, oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Jericho wins. It's like, oh, okay. Omega loses. Like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wonder if in hindsight, if AEW could have that one back, if they would have had Omega win.
I don't think they would have. Considering Jericho was like the guy who was their champion for most of the next year.
Well, you think they would have? You think maybe in hindsight they would have had Omega be the first champion? Kind of like go with the younger talent.
I don't think that would have been a good idea, honestly. If you have Omega carrying the belt onto TNT, like casual fans, like who the hell is this? Why should I care? And they draw even less viewers out of the blocks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess we're going to discuss this in a minute. I think they went Jericho and Hangman for the World Championship at All Out. I think they would have been better off saving Jericho and Omega for All Out. But
what would they've done at Double or Nothing then?
Well, you do what? You could do Jericho and Cody.
You have Cody and Dustin main event, I guess.
No, you have Jericho and whoever. You have Jericho and Cody main event for the number one contender spot or something. I don't know. It's definitely a debate. Or you can just do Jericho and Hangman.
Is it a debate? Is it, Kevin?
I don't know. Did they need to burn Jericho and Omega at the first pay per view? Did they need to burn
Yeah,
it?
true. I mean,
Did they really? Because like
realistically, if
people.
they had, yeah, if they did Cody and Dustin, that's like the match everyone remembers, and then you can just have Jericho versus whoever, and then Moxley debuts. Like that's all that there is to talk about. So I get where you're coming from there for sure.
Yeah, it's like 10,000 people are gonna buy tickets anyway. It was gonna do 100,000 buys on pay per view, regardless. Did they need to burn it? Because it was like a number one contenders match, and then they had the whole debacle where Pac got stuck in England and he couldn't make his match with Hangman, and they had to do like a battle royal for Hangman to get his number one contender spot. It was just like it turned out maybe not the best the way they would have wanted it.
Yeah, a bit messy, but at the end of the day, I mean, we get swept up into Jericho versus Hangman Page at All Out, where the winner becomes the inaugural AEW World Champion, Kevin. Now, Hangman Page, I mean, definitely wasn't ready at this time. Like, outside of people who like hardcore follow the Elite, like a lot of people have never heard of Hangman Page. So Jericho versus Hangman Page, I mean, they built the match all right. I mean, once again, they don't have a TV deal by this point, so it's all social media. It's all building it that way. I distinctly remember Jim Ross during Jericho's entrance being like, "Oh, Jericho told me earlier in the day this is the this is the biggest match of his career because he has to prove to everyone once and for all if he can still hang, if he can still go." And I'm just like, yeah, okay. They're building it up. They're giving it something, some recognizable characteristic. So in that regard, I think Jericho and Hangman Page. I'll get your thoughts on the match, Kevin. Just the thoughts on the build. What do you think? Like,
I thought it was a little bit underwhelming all around in general. Like there was nothing really to the build up. It was just Hangman Page in his house screaming at Jericho on a YouTube show, and Jericho just being like, Hangman, nobody's ever heard of you. I'm gonna make you famous, kid." Like they're just that was essentially the build. There really wasn't much there. And then it was just like I remember I had high hopes for Hangman. I thought he would be a big star, but I just thought it was too much too soon because he really didn't do much. He was just kind of the guy that hung out with the Young Bucks, Cody and Kenny, for like the last 3 years.
Yeah,
he would hang out, drink a beer. He'd have some funny segments on BTE, but he wasn't really the guy to be the main star. He wasn't really ready for that. And I think it was AEW. They were trying to build a new star with Hangman, but then the match gets to the ring at All Out, and just nobody really cared. Like I'm not trying to be like dismissive of the match, but nobody really cared for the match. Everybody was just there to see Jericho win, I think.
I mean, basically, like could they have done that match as the main event of Double or Nothing instead of All Out and done Jericho Omega at All Out for the title, as you kind of were alluding to before? I mean, quite possibly. Like this,
that would have been better. I think
probably, yeah. Like this All Out match was just, I mean, from memory, everyone rated it like 4 stars. It was like a 20-minute match. The ring work was slow. It was like Jericho at this stage, who's the Painmaker, aka Fat Jericho, doing his Judas effect, swinging back elbow where he hits the guy in the throat, and then Hangman Page was like, punching Jericho. It was an okay match. Like it's not a match I'd at all want to go back and see. It's like, okay, it's a 20-minute all right match, and Jericho won. It's like,
it was like what the theme with All Out was. They were trying to make new stars. They were trying to create the Dark Order. They were trying to create Shawn Spears by having a feud with Cody. They were trying to get Pac over by having him beat Kenny Omega. It was a lot of AEW just trying to like establish new stars by having these guys beat the people that everybody wanted to see. Like, and people bought Double or Nothing because they wanted to see Kenny Omega beat Jericho. So you have Jericho beat Omega. People wanted to see, they wanted to see the Young Bucks and the Lucha Bros beat the Young Bucks. So it's like, okay, well, what are we doing here? The Elite was the big draw. And then Jericho he was helpful in a lot of ways, but he could have been harmful in some ways too. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think about that perspective?
So it's such a tricky question. Like Jericho, I stand by that. Him winning the matches in 2019 on pay-per-view was like, it was the right call. Like he beats Omega, he beats Hangman, he beats Cody. Could he have potentially put over Omega? Yeah, for sure. Could he potentially put over Hangman? I mean, maybe. Would that have been best for business? Not at all. Like, it just, yeah, it's a great question. It's a contentious one, obviously. I just think the way AEW did the first year, particularly like from Double or Nothing on, like Double or Nothing 2019 to Double or Nothing 2020, I thought they worked it about as well as they could have. That's like how I see it. Like I made the video I Miss Old AEW where I essentially just praised like this period for AEW, how I feel like the decisions they made were for the most part the right ones. I feel like Jericho going over Cody Rhodes, Jericho winning the match against Hangman Page and becoming world champion, Jericho with the Inner Circle, the storyline with Cody, then Jericho doing the stuff with Moxley. Like I thought all of that was worked and played out well. That's how I'd say it.
So. Oh yeah, I would say overall, yeah, Jericho winning was probably the right decision. I think they really had no other single stars for Jericho to wrestle at that time. Like what were they going to do with Jericho in November of 2019 instead of having him wrestle Cody? And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but realistically, it was like he had to face all three members of the Elite. And yeah, you could argue having him beat all three of the guys that the company was founded on, maybe not the best thing in hindsight. Maybe like 10 years from now, people will look at it differently once 10 years goes by. But, as of right now, it still stands as the best decision. The only thing I would have done personally is flipped the Double or Nothing and All Out main events. I would have had Jericho and Omega be for the inaugural AEW championship instead of having like Jericho and Omega wrestle for a number one contenders match.
Yeah,
that's probably
now you've mentioned and explained that. I think that definitely would have been best for business. And also, I think you mentioned with the winners of these matches. I mean, God forbid, imagine if Cody Rhodes beat Jericho for the world title at Full Gear. I mean, imagine.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I get that. They would have been outraged. They would have had to turn Cody heel, and Cody's definitely better suited as an upper mid card babyface. But it is.
Yeah.
It would have
been.
I mean,
that happens. I mean, the Inner Circle gets formed, which when it comes to Chris Jericho, as far as his like legacy in the current day, the Inner Circle is going to be a big factor because how long the stable's together, we don't know. Maybe you're listening to this 5 years down the line and the Inner Circle have been broken up for 2 years. But as of the making of this, they've been like a stable effectively for over a year and a half now. They've been well and truly either in the main event scene of like AEW or the upper mid card. They've been involved with a number of massive matches, notably the Stadium Stampede, a number of big storylines, moments. Kevin, what are your honest thoughts on the Inner Circle?
I liked the Inner Circle at first. My very first initial reaction was, okay, this is cool. You have the Elite going up against Jericho and Jake Hager being a big surprise at the first Dynamite was kind of like, okay, like it's Jack Swagger, I don't really care. But Santana and Ortiz showing up, Sammy Guevara aligning with Jericho, that was pretty big. It's just the Jake Hager piece is still kind of like, it felt like AEW, they could have done better. That's just my opinion. Like, I think maybe a guy like Brian Cage or somebody would have been a good addition. But, I look at it, I'm like, wow, this is kind of like old school wrestling. It's almost like WCW in a lot of ways, for good or bad. Because you have the Elite, and that was the first big feud that AEW was built around. For the first, 6 months up until the pandemic hit, was the Inner Circle versus the Elite. And it was like, yeah, right, would you say it was like the marquee feud? And it was really good TV, I thought. Some of the segments they did with Jericho and Cody, some of the segments they did with, just with the both teams fighting. You have you throw Darby Allin in there. I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, I thought they worked it really well. Like, legit, the Inner Circle, I mean, you call them kind of, it's like a WCW type of stable almost. Like, I think the way they formed it when they had the first Dynamite show closed with Jake Hagar being like the big surprise and the Inner Circle was formed, it was kind of cool. Like, I'm not gonna fake shock and be like, oh my god, Jack Swagger's in AEW, oh wow, like, okay, but the stable itself was cool. Jericho, I'll never forget watching that promo live the next week where he did the infamous line, a stupid idea from bad creative. I'll never forget that. That line will live in Twitter history forever. That is just, Kevin, what a line.
Yeah, that was when it was still funny, when AEW mentioned WWE. And we'll talk about that later on in the Tony Khan episode. That was the first one where it was like, wow, okay, that was funny. Good line, Jericho. I gotta give it to him. I'm generally not a fan of those cheap shots at WWE, but that was a good one. And
that one was needed because there was a building full of people, these just 36-year-old men who are like, I know things. We the people. And then Joker did that, and they were all like, hey, just WWE, the evil E, pal. Yeah, stick it to him, Chris.
Exactly. I think it's funny, though, that even AEW fans hate Jake Hager. I just have to get that in there. It's funny to me.
Nice. So, I mean, yeah, like that happens. Joker does that line. They do that whole segment where, like, the Inner Circle have their skybox. I'll never forget that. Like, the Inner Circle are sitting there, and Cody Rhodes is like, having a match, and then Rhodes like looking up at the Elite. The Inner Circle's like skybox, and like Dustin Rhodes rushes out there. It's just this big brawl erupts, and it's just you got like the Elite and like Dustin, and you've got the Inner Circle punching through the concourse, and I mean that was a great segment in itself. Like there's so many like cool segments happened in the first like couple of months of Dynamite involving the Elite, the Inner Circle. Jericho's role in that was huge. He was like the main face of the whole thing. So I thought that was good, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Jericho being the face of Dynamite, probably the best move with these promos. Where, like you said, you have smart fans that are just clamoring for any kind of inside baseball terms.
We the people. I know he was swagger. I watched WWE. It's like, what is this? Like, okay, we get it. You have a Twitter account. Well done. Go outside. Like,
Jesus. Yeah, I remember he did the title defense against Darby Allin on an episode of Dynamite. That was what it was. I wasn't a big. I guess we could transition to the Cody feud. I wasn't as big of a fan as some people were of the Cody feud. I just thought once Cody said, "Oh, I'm never gonna get an AEW title shot if I lose," I just thought it got cheesy after that. Like, is that necessary? You know what I mean? It just felt like a really unnecessary line. That took me out of it.
It wasn't necessary at all. But then, in totality, you look at Cody Rhodes, and it's probably been best for AEW because if Cody Rhodes is in the world title picture, do you think that would have done more good or more bad for AEW?
I think Cody being used in a role where he can challenge for the title at a pay-per-view in just a random match, like if they need something that they're short on ideas, they could do that. Now they're kind of in a position where Cody's just going to be mid-card for life, and what is Cody doing now? He's doing gender reveals on TV. He's making his matches with mid-card indie wrestlers more important than, Moxley's match when he was AEW champion. So that's a whole other topic for another day. But I just wasn't a fan of this at all, really. Some of the segments were good, but I wasn't a fan of the Cody Jericho pairing in general. It was just not for me.
Yeah, I mean, reasonable. But I think, this was their first pay-per-view since going to TNT. So having Jericho versus Cody Rhodes, it was a logical, main event type match to do. At the same time, they're doing Moxley and Omega at that show and unsanctioned. So they really loaded up Full Gear 2019. I think the build to Jericho Cody, that contract signing, I remember vividly. I remember it being worked pretty well. I couldn't recite to you line for line what was said or anything, but I remember watching that live thinking, yeah, pretty damn good segment. I mentioned the Inner Circle, the concourse brawl. I mean, the Elite, pretty good. Just generally across the board, I'd say the whole Cody and Jericho thing, I'd say the best way to describe it, Kevin, pretty good. Was it an all-time great pro wrestling segment and angle and match and storyline that everyone's going to fondly remember for decades and decades? I mean, I'm sure some all-elite shills will, but generally speaking, it was objectively just pretty good. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it was solid. It did the job. It did what it needed to do. No, I guess another thing we need to mention too, while we're talking about this era of Jericho, was when Scorpio Sky pinned him on an episode of Dynamite. Well, what were your thoughts on that?
So random. Like why? Yeah, that's one thing with Scorpio Sky. It's you see it at the moment. When we're recording this bio, Scorpio Sky the second straight week has run out maybe even third straight week, has ran out in the Dynamite main event and interfered and started beating someone up to close the show. And it's they do this random stuff with Scorpio Sky, him pinning Jericho. This is the Jericho who beat Omega, Page, Cody. I get it was a roll-up and it wasn't a real setup finish where, Scorpio Sky is going to really beat Jericho and bury him. It wasn't like that at all. But nonetheless, like, you have Scorpio Sky in a tag match pin Jericho. It's like, is there a need for this? Like, really?
It gave me like really negative flashbacks to when Fandango or Fandango pinned Chris Jericho at WrestleMania 29. Like that was the first thing that went through my mind. And I remember watching like what did they get, like what has Scorpio Sky done since then? It was like the first time that AEW just hotshotted something. It was like, yeah, we'll figure it out later, and then they just dropped it. I was not a fan at all. Like, why are you having Scorpio Sky pin Jericho? And nothing against Sky, like you said, but it's you have Sammy Guevara's in the match. Why can't Sammy Guevara take the L? It didn't make sense. They were hyping up like, I remember them hyping up like, oh, Jericho's never taken a loss in AEW. So I'm thinking, okay, the guy that's gonna beat Jericho is a guy like maybe Hangman or somebody else like Moxley, someone. And it's going to be this big deal. Jericho's going to drop the title. But no, Jericho's first loss is him losing in a random tag match to Scorpio Sky. It was just weird. Weird booking.
Just so random. Like, legit, you've got Sammy Guevara there, who is literally Chris Jericho's version of Jey Uso. You know, the guy who will lose to the guy he's feuding with in literally every match and take the pins. Guevara's there, but instead Scorpio Sky pins Jericho. And I get some people can be like, oh, well, you're dwelling too much on this. It doesn't really matter. It's like, well, they built Jericho up the first like year as like, this is the all-encompassing, this is the demo god. Like, they weren't calling him that at that point, but this is the guy who is the face of, you know, our promotion. And then he loses to Scorpio Sky. This isn't Sting. This isn't him losing to one of these like all-time legends who everyone knows. It's Scorpio Sky, Kevin.
Yeah, and I get it. It's aggressive booking. I commend them for being aggressive and doing things that WWE doesn't necessarily do.
But they did the Fandango thing, Kevin.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like Jericho, if you compare Jericho to what he was in AEW, he was kind of like the John Cena or Brock Lesnar of AEW. You know, like you can't really compare the two. You know what I mean?
Well, but like, this is where you have people being like, well, but what? So it's okay when Hurricane pins The Rock, or it's okay when, like, Maven eliminates The Undertaker, but when Jericho gets pinned by Scorpio Sky, it's like, oh, okay, but like, you look at it case by case, but the fact of the matter is, first time Jericho got pinned in this promotion was the Scorpio Sky. You know, that just doesn't sit well. It's just...
It doesn't. It was AEW being aggressive just for the sake of being aggressive. They have no plan. They had no story to make Scorpio Sky into a big star, because theoretically, Scorpio Sky pinning Jericho, 2 years removed, he should be doing more than just appearing on AEW Dark doing commentary in the middle of random matches, right? Like, I think that's pretty fair to say, but...
you gotta look at the times. This was legit, like, November 2019, late November this happened. At the time, SCU had just either won the tag titles and become the inaugural tag champions, or they were like a week away from doing so. So in that regard, was it a play to try and make the tag team division seem more legitimate because one of the tag team champions just pinned Jericho? And if you're doing that, I mean, what's the need when AEW, everyone knows they've got a good tag division anyway, so what's the need to do that if maybe that was the thinking? Like, trying to rationalize it is a tough one. Considering, Kevin, I just don't know. It was a weird move. Jericho, did it really hurt him that much in the long run? I mean,
no. Jericho
getting pinned innocuously by Scorpio Sky in a random match in November 2019. Compare that to a 3-month-long feud with Orange Cassidy. The Sky thing's a non-event, but like, it's just weird. It was a weird occurrence, Kevin.
Yeah, the Scorpio Sky pinning Jericho doesn't hurt Jericho at all. Jericho still got one of the most popular podcasts in the wrestling world. He's still a superstar. He's still a rock star. Like, he's still the biggest star in AEW to this day. 2 years later, it doesn't matter. He's
buried, Kevin. He's buried. He lost a match. He's buried.
Oh yeah. Tony Khan's got it out for Jericho. But yeah, so that we could talk about. Oh yeah, then they had a match. I remember. I say this real quick. They had a match I believe the next week, a 1-on-1 match where Jericho just beat Scorpio Sky, and it was like, oh, okay, all right, you know. But yeah, not really much to say there.
Also, I want to quickly mention another thing. I mean, we could discuss the Cody match. I want to talk about the one thing after that real quick. Mm-hmm. I remember the Lexicon of Les Champions That's one of the best things. And also, how have we not talked about this? The little bit of the bubbly. Like, that was legit. After Jericho wins the title and he eventually loses the belt, like, the next day, and that was, like, a big, big story. Jericho was literally walking around backstage being like, yeah, I'm going to celebrate with a little bit of the bubbly. Like, and that becomes the most sold T-shirt, I believe, in AEW's first year. I could be mistaken, but it's right up there.
You're correct, yeah.
Yeah, and you've got Chris Jericho's face when he was like all beaten up and battered from the match with Hangman, and he's walking around with a bottle of bubbly. And then I remember for the holiday season they sold Chris Jericho bottles of bubbly, and they sold like 12,000 bottles in the first week or something. And then like that's like the holiday merchandise for AEW. And then Jericho does the Lexicon of Le Champion. Like one of the things with Jericho, we talked about this enough already, but just generally, there's always something new. There's something fresh, there's something different. A little bit of the bubbly, the Lexicon of Le Champion. Like, yes, it was just a rip off the list, but it was a different name. Like, always doing something different. That's just the greatness of Jericho, pal.
Absolutely. Yeah. You pretty much covered where I was going. So, yeah, you have the Lexicon of Le Champion. Yeah, do you want to say anything about the Cody match, though, at Full Gear? Specifically, anything you want to add about that?
Similar to the Hangman match. I mean, yes, the storytelling was much better in the Cody match because, I mean, MJF's involvement, would he throw in the towel, and then MJF eventually did, and then, just Cody was in the walls of Jericho, and it was excruciating pain, and Cody couldn't take it. So, yeah, they do the whole thing. Jericho retains, as you kind of expected. I mean, Cody winning just wouldn't have been the right move in the long run. I definitely don't believe that. So, yeah, no, anything you've got about Cody and Jericho from Full Gear, or do you want to move on to
Yeah, I've already said my piece. I want to talk about the Moxley feud.
I want to talk about one thing really quickly also. Yeah, the stuff they did with the Jurassic Express in December, I mean, pretty innocuous, but like this is like Dynamite, like what, 8, 9, 10 episodes in. Yeah, this is like a really early days Dynamite, and they had this segment where Chris Jericho's in the ring. It was the Lexicon of Le Champion list. Like Jericho was contractually obliged to defend his AEW World title one more time on Dynamite in 2019. And he's going through the list of all the people he might be facing, and he's like, Moxley, Cody, Page, Hangman Page, Cody, Moxley. And it's a funny segment. And then the one person he leaves off is Jungle Boy. And then literally Joker calls him a POS. But like literally, it was pretty funny. Just generally speaking, the stuff with Jungle Boy, random, innocuous, but good, it's good TV, pal.
Yeah, it's classic Jericho. Jericho was a meme in 2019. 2019 Jericho, those memes are going to live forever. That little bit of the bubbly, like Champion, all that stuff, that's gonna live forever. And then even later on, the Demo God, like those things are gonna live forever. But
well, Kevin, that's what you need in wrestling. Like you need that kind of stuff where like social media is gonna keep talking about you and you're gonna stay relevant. That's 2021. Like Roman Reigns, we talked about that in the 50 Reasons Reigns is Awesome video. Reigns has that in spades with like the social media, gifs and funny moments. Jericho in 2019 had that at the wazoo. Like once again, greatness of Jericho, the amount of different stuff he'd do, just wild.
Yeah, that's why I love Jericho. He's always funny. He's at the cutting edge of society. He knows what to say for the most part in the ring.
Not outside of the ring though, as we'll get to. But yeah, go on.
We're definitely gonna get to that. So I want to talk about the Moxley feud. I'm glad you brought up all of his meme-worthy stuff too, because I kind of forgot about most of it. I thought in my timeline, I thought those things happened in like February, January, but you're right, they did happen at the end of 2019.
Yeah.
So then we get to this Moxley feud, and I just remember the whole genesis of the feud was Moxley going like, I think I'm gonna join the Inner Circle, Chris. We came from the WWE, Chris. Like that's pretty much what I remember. Just Jericho handing him a shirt, and Moxley just going, should I join? Should I not join? What should I do? It was at that point where it became evident that Moxley was going to be the new guy, right, to take the reins from AEW. But for me, it felt like this feud kind of dragged. Would you say like it was good, the Jericho Moxley feud, but it dragged?
This was the first time you really kind of noticed AEW having 4 pay-per-views a year, like because they did Full Gear in God knows when, like early November, like I think November 9th, 2019.
It was a month after the first Dynamite. Yeah.
Yeah, I think November 9th, 2019, something like that. Yeah. So then Revolution 2020 is literally like February like 27th or so. It's like end of February. So you've got literally 4 months to fill in. So that's where you get the Scorpio Sky thing, you get the Jungle Boy thing. Dynamite has like a week off at the end of 2019 following the Dark Order Dustin Rhodes incident, which made the Young Bucks quit Twitter. And then you begin 2020, we get Jericho's Rock and Wrestling Rager at Sea, which that's once again Chris Jericho reinventing the wheel, doing a cruise. Like, just only Jericho, Kevin. Like, wow. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, to answer the initial question before you go on with whatever you want to say, just, yeah, the feud definitely did drag. Like, that was the first time I really noticed being like, nothing's really happening on these shows. Like, there are a number of dynamites. Like, yes, the build to Revolution, some notable, like really notable stuff did happen. We did see will John Moxley join the Inner Circle, that segment they did where Moxley predictably turned at the end after he tricked Jericho into thinking he was going to join the stable. And then they spent 6 weeks with like Jericho being like, well, John, I'll give you possession of the $750,000 car if you join the Inner Circle, and you'll have 49% or 51% rights to the Inner Circle LLC. It's like, okay. And it just went on and on,
Yeah. Yeah, my general synopsis on this was like, maybe AEW, they could have done like a Jericho Scorpio Sky program from December to January, and then like middle to late January they start building Jericho and Moxley. It was like they didn't really need to build this feud for 3 months. It was just kind of unnecessary, That's probably the way I would look at it.
Would you say they could have had, maybe if they do the Jericho Sky thing, have Jericho or Scorpio Sky for like the AEW World Title main event, the Jericho Rock and Rager at Sea?
Yeah, something like that, or the New Year's episode. That was a big episode,
They were doing a lot of big shows at that time. Like, I mean, they did the New Year's show, the Homecoming show, Jericho's Rock and Wrestling Rager, Bash at the Beach. I mean, they were like Dynamite at the beginning of 2020 was
really good.
It was a stack of fun. It was a stack of fun.
Really
so,
yeah. Like really I think good. you have Jericho and Scorpio Sky main event, the big New Year's show. Like they could have that like a TV free pay-per-view. They do some big stuff on it, just freestyling, really no rhyme or reason, but. Yeah, like I think some of those segments, like the car segment with Moxley, it was just like, is this necessary? Like we know that Moxley and Jericho are gonna fight. Can we just get to it? Like it was still like good TV. It was quality TV, but it was like you felt the fatigue.
Well, I remember at the time Jericho was having a match with Tanahashi at Wrestle Kingdom 14, so right. I remember that one segment where Jericho was in Japan. And he was like standing in front of the $750,000 car, and he did like a 5-minute promo being like, "John Moxley, this car could be yours if you do proceed to join the Inner Circle. John, we're gonna need a decision from you whether you will join the Inner Circle. Right here is a $750,000 car. If you, John, join the Inner Circle, you get this car." Like that was legit the promo, because Jericho was like on the outside of the world about to have a match with Tanahashi, which. I mean, I'll mention that really quickly. That match was jokes. Jericho flipping off the New Japan crowd, flipping off the camera. It was just funny. Like, the match was a meme, but nonetheless, like, yeah, Jericho Moxley. Anything you want to say about the match at Revolution, Kevin?
Yeah, I remember that. I just remember that segment. I'll just say this. It was just like, Moxley's just like, oh, I don't know, Chris. I'm not going to join. It was like, oh, okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Moxley. But, yeah, the match at Revolution, it was pretty good. I thought it was good. It was, predictable outcome. You kind of knew that Moxley was going to get the belt. In hindsight, was that the right way to go? Do you think, having Jericho put over Moxley? What do you think?
I think if the pandemic never hit, like, it's one of those things. Moxley's title reign, same thing with Drew McIntyre. It's like, he got put in a very tough position. I think giving Moxley the ball, supposedly, was probably a good way of going. Like, yeah, Jericho was really good and all, and Jericho probably could have held the title for even upwards of like 6 more months, realistically. But giving it to Moxley, I thought it was a rational move. It made sense. If the pandemic never hit, I'm sure it'd be a bit better of a reign. Instead, Moxley's reign's legit 6 weeks of them building up to an empty arena, no holds barred match versus Jake Hagar. I'm just like, bruh.
Yeah, that was interesting, that whole build. But yeah, so you have, I think it was the right way to go. Moxley was, I guess you could say, in theory, AEW's biggest mainstream star. He just came off a run with the Shield. A lot of people could argue that. I mean, it's definitely Jericho in my from my perspective, but you could argue that
Yeah.
Moxley was the biggest mainstream star. So it was.
So quick question, quick question. So let's real quick compare 2016, Jericho and Ambrose do their feud. They're feuding over Mitch the Potted Plant. I mean, we ranted about this in the last episode. And then we get this 2020 storyline between Jericho and Moxley. You know, which one do you think was better? How much better was one than the other? Just real quick compare them, could you?
I would say, I mean, the AEW feud was better, definitely, just by pure default, because any almost anything in wrestling is going to be better than Dean Ambrose going, "Hey, this is my potted plant, Mitch. I met him at a doctor's office, huh? You know, anything's going to be better than that." Jericho and Ambrose feuding over a talking plant or whatever, this imaginary friend of Dean Ambrose. Like, no, anything's better than that. But the Jericho Moxley thing wasn't riveting TV. You know, it wasn't, you can't miss. I think Cody and MJF and Kenny Omega, Hangman, and the Young Bucks were kind of carrying Dynamite at that time.
Yes, 100%. I remember February 2020. This is when they're ramping up the build to Moxley and Jericho. And the whole storyline is that Moxley lost an eye. And it's like you've got MJF doing lashings to Cody doing a moonsault off a cage versus Wardlow. You've got Omega doing a 30-minute Iron Man match with Park, Omega and Page versus the Lucha Bros, the tag title. You got all this stuff happening on Dynamite. I remember the women's division was actually kind of decent in that February. Meanwhile, the main event world title scene between the two biggest namesake stars in the promotion, Jericho and Moxley, is legit. Moxley, you lost your eye. You have to wear an eye patch. Oh, you made, I believe it was Santana, lose his eye. Oh, well, we're going to have a match at Revolution. Here's our weigh-in segment. Oh, the weigh-in segment got destroyed at the end. Just meh. But compared to Mitch the Plant, where Moxley's like, oh, no, I'm crazy. The part of plan. I'll smash it on you, Jericho. I love Mitch.
Yeah, it was bad. Yeah, the only thing I say is this was AEW's two biggest stars from a mainstream perspective going at it. It was definitely the right move for the pay-per-view. Moxley winning was the right move. And then the pandemic hit, pretty much right after. Literally, 2 weeks after Moxley's title reign starts, the pandemic hits, and here we are. Now we're
everything changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. One segment I'll never forget is when they did Matt Hardy. Was it his debut? It was Jericho and Matt Hardy doing that face off in the empty arena, and then they're just in the ring just talking in full character for 8 minutes, and Matt Hardy is in the ring talking about his 3,000-year-old whatever, just Matt Hardy being Matt Hardy, just brilliant. And Jericho is playing up to this perfectly, and it's just one of these segments where you're thinking, this is wrestling, pal. This is character. This is must-see stuff. So I remember that. And then speaking of that, where did they go with that? Were they going to do Jericho versus Matt Hardy? What happened with that?
I think that was the plan. Had there been fans, because the pandemic really threw a wrench. I don't think. Oh, they were gonna do the Blood and Guts. That's what it was. Blood and Guts was gonna be.
That was the main plan. Yeah.
Yeah, it was gonna be Blood and Guts. It was gonna be the Inner Circle versus the Elite, and I think the whole thing was the whole story was Cody was oh, I don't want to be in the Elite anymore. I want to be on my own, kind of thing. And they were gonna have maybe Matt Hardy join, but maybe take that spot, and they were gonna do Blood and Guts. I'm pretty sure Double or Nothing was gonna be Broken Matt versus Jericho. I'm pretty sure that was gonna be the plan. But then they ended up doing, the Stadium Stampede, which was really good, meme worthy.
That turned out amazing. I will say, Blood and Guts featuring the Inner Circle and the Elite never happened. That'll be until the end of time, the match which people go, oh, I wish we saw that. Oh, I wish this happened. Obviously we get that, but obviously pandemic hits. They were teasing Jericho and Hardy. Nothing really came of that. The Stadium Stampede happened. Insane. Watching that live is something I won't forget. Seeing Hangman Page riding through the stadium on a horse, and Chris Jericho. I remember they recorded this I believe 2 days before, or maybe the day before Double or Nothing, and Jericho and everyone in the match was just raving about it, how great it was. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I know it's their job to do that, but you can tell this is probably pretty sick. And then we saw it at Double or Nothing, and it's wow, okay, this is dope.
Yeah,
really
it's
dope.
just a bunch of grown men running around in a football stadium. You got in an empty football stadium. You got Matt Hardy doing the reincarnations of Matt Hardy. The famous meme of Matt chasing Sammy Guevara with the golf cart. I mean, you know that
You got Jericho putting on a pylon hat on his head and just like laughing in the most corny giggle ever. And you got like Jericho screaming at Aubrey Edwards, then hitting a spinning back elbow to the Jacksonville mascot. I died at that. It's like another one of these social media moments. Like Jericho, within the space of 30 seconds, does the pylon hat bit, which was jokes, yells at Aubrey Edwards, and then looks at the Jacksonville mascot, calls him a stupid idiot, or he yelled something abusive at him, and hit a Judas effect on the mascot. Just like, this is just like, bruh.
Good stuff.
Man.
You got Hangman sitting at the bar alone, depressed. Like, that's another meme. Hangman and Omega doing the whole, like, the toast with the milk and the beer. There was just so much good stuff in that match.
Yep.
And then I would say...
Jericho's involved in...
I would say here, after Stadium Stampede, things for Jericho kind of took a plateau. I don't want to say it took a turn for the worse, but...
Well, no. To be fair, they did the segment with Mike Tyson literally about a week and a half after.
Yeah, I was gonna say they do this thing with Mike Tyson, and then it was like nothing happened. It was this big, massive dynamite moment. Jericho and Tyson. Jericho's like, "Oh, I remember when you knocked me out 10 years ago." More inside baseball, And then they do this big face-off. Mike Tyson has to be pulled apart. Mike Tyson looks like an absolute animal, just ready to kill Jericho. Jericho's not afraid of him. And then it was like, oh, next week, Jericho and Orange Cassidy start feuding. They just forgot Mike Tyson ever existed. It was just weird,
Yeah, and like, that segues into what we kind of talked about to begin this. Jericho and Orange Cassidy. Now it's like, okay, I get what they were trying to do. They saw something in Orange Cassidy. They want to have the biggest star in the promotion put over Cassidy. But really, the whole thing with this was, for one, I mean, how they booked the feud was okay. I mean, whatever. But really, it was the follow-up. It's like what they did with Orange Cassidy after All Out. And, I mean, what they did with him was like basically nothing. Like, what did Orange Cassidy do after All Out? After 3 months of Chris Jericho, the biggest star in the promotion, losing matches to him, putting him over, trying to make him seem like the biggest star on the planet, and they just did nothing with it.
Yeah, I know. It was like they had Orange Cassidy out there with Miro, getting beat up by Miro and Kip Sabian, and then he's doing like AEW Dark matches. They're promoting like, oh, it's Orange Cassidy versus so and so on AEW Dark. It's like, oh, okay, like, yeah, not a high point for Jericho's AEW run. It was kind of like, I've said this before, but it was kind of like the extent of Jericho, his star power. Like, Jericho, he could get anything over. He can get a piece of paper over, a plant, a pen, a list, a scarf, whatever. He could get all these things over. But then it was, this guy, Orange Cassidy, started selling a bunch of t-shirts. So the Young Bucks were like, oh, let's put him in there. He's selling good merch, bro. Let's put him in there with you, Jericho. And Jericho's like, yeah, I'll get him over. And it just didn't work. There were some people that really enjoyed it. Some people got a kick out of Cassidy, but the Orange Cassidy bit, the character, whatever you want to call it, the Orange Cassidy persona is something that needs fans. It's not the same when you have Orange Cassidy doing his sloth style in an empty arena or a bunch of planted wrestlers. It's just not the same, so it didn't have the same effect. And then you get these corny segments with Jericho beating Orange Cassidy with a bag of oranges, and like Orange Cassidy dropping orange juice on Jericho in the inner circle, like his Vince McMahon getting crapped on by DX. It's just like, maybe I remember watching this. I'm like, what are we watching? Like, this is no better than Kayla Braxton getting slime dumped on her by John Morrison and The Miz. But because it happened in AEW, everybody loves it.
Yes, quite literally. It's like you've got Jericho getting orange juice and the inner circle getting orange juice all over them. And then the next week, Jericho comes out holding like the white blazer he was wearing that had all the orange juice on it, and he's like holding the blazer, and he's like, "Look what you did, Orange! Look what you did! This is a $7,000 blazer." And it's like, okay, like he tried his best to make this work. He tried to make Orange Cassidy seem like some big, generational encompassing star, but it's just like without the crowd there, without much investment there, it was really hard to care. Like the one like positive I remember was like the debate segment with Bischoff. Like I remember that fondly. Like Eric Bischoff's out there, he asks some questions. Jericho is just talking and talking. Then they do the bit where Orange Cassidy recites like 30 seconds of in-depth scientific knowledge. Everyone's like, oh, wow. I guess that was a good segment, but really the whole 3-month storyline was like, oh, well, you're flushing Jericho's momentum away for what? Orange Cassidy, you know?
Yeah, that was good. The Bischoff debate segment was good. Orange Cassidy showing that he could talk and he was intelligent. Pretty good segment. But yeah, like you said, it's like we're sacrificing all this momentum. We get to All Out. They had this Mimosa Mayhem match, and it's a 51-year-old man getting dumped into a hot tub of mimosa by Orange Cassidy. Like that's literally what happened. I'm not making it up. I'm not trying to be disparaging. That's just what I watched at All Out on pay-per-view. That's what people paid $50 to see. It was a 51-year-old man, professional wrestler / heavy metal band singer, whatever, get dumped in a hot tub of vodka and orange juice. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, if this happened on WWE TV, the internet would lose their freaking mind. Like, imagine if Roman Reigns and Jey Uso had a match, and Roman Reigns dumped Jey Uso in a hot tub of like chocolate milk or something. People would lose their freaking mind.
Imagine The Miz and John Morrison throw Damian Priest into a thing of orange juice and vodka.
Yeah, people would lose their minds. Oh, Damian Priest is buried. The Miz and Morrison, they suck. Like, WWE's terrible.
The worst show in wrestling. I hope this company's stocks hit zero and they burn to hell tomorrow. I hate Vince McMahon, the evil E-pal. You know, AEW's the good guys. AEW has Jericho, as you say, a 51-year-old man, fall into this like bath of orange juice and vodka. And I mean, I personally speaking, subjectively, I hate this match because this was responsible for getting my channel a copyright strike, just this match. But nonetheless,
I hate it too. Don't worry, I'm with you.
So that happens. Jericho's the only visual after All Out, because All Out was quite literally AEW's worst pay-per-view effort ever. That was, oh my God, what a show. What a dreadful show All Out was. That show sucked. But
didn't Cassidy beat Jericho twice in a row clean too? He beat him on an episode of Dynamite like 3 weeks before All Out.
They did the match at Fyter Fest,
Jericho
which I believe
beat him.
Cassidy won. Then they did the $7,000 Blazer match, which Jericho won.
Yeah, Jericho beat him at Fyter Fest.
And then they did the Mimosa match, pal.
Yeah, Jericho beat him at Fyter Fest, and then Cassidy won twice in a row. Cassidy won on Dynamite, and the big rubber match was, Jericho getting thrown in a hot tub of vodka and orange juice. Like, oh.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So that happened. So you've got the biggest star in the promotion gets beaten in a 3-month feud against Orange Cassidy, a guy who doesn't talk and is literally just the personification of just a mid-card talent. Like it's the same thing as taking the tribal chief Roman Reigns and having him do a 3-month storyline with Sami Zayn, and Sami Zayn wins 2 of the 3 matches. It's near enough the same thing. When you look at the characters, who they're catered for, how over they are, like it's near enough the same thing. People are going to debate, that's not a fair comparison. It essentially is. It's a mid-card talent where the top star in the promotion sacrifices their momentum to try and put someone over and elevate them, when in reality, it's not really meant to do so. So, Kevin, that happens, and where to from there with Jericho? Where does Jericho go from there, pal?
Oh, well, he goes right to a feud with MJF. That's pretty much what we get, and we're kind of still in the middle of that, right? Like,
I mean, kind of, but like one thing, this is around the time when Jericho's starting to get canceled.
I'm sorry, we get a storyline with MJF. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is around the time when Jericho starts to get cancelled. I mean, around this time, there's the big ordeal with like the masks at a Fozzy concert, which we not for a second want to turn this into masks, anti-masks, politics. Like, we're not here to do that. We're here to objectively report on and comment on Jericho's life and legacy and whatnot. So we can't deny there's this big ordeal with Jericho where Fozzy runs a concert and most of the people there aren't wearing masks, which, considering the state of the global pandemic, was a massive issue and raised a lot of alarm bells. Chris Jericho responsible for the spreading of coronavirus. Chris Jericho spreads COVID. Chris Jericho doesn't care about COVID. Chris Jericho doesn't think COVID's real. All this kind of BS is surrounding Jericho. He's being cancelled on Twitter. It's this big scandal, big deal, Kevin. What do you remember from this? Because you were fully entrenched in wrestling Twitter by this point. Walk me through the cancellation of Jericho here, pal.
I just remember thinking, like, wow, this is crazy. It's crazy. Like, was this the same story? Does this correlate with like the Jericho, the Fozzy band running at a festival with like 100,000 people or something? And then Jericho tweets out, "Oh, there was 100,000 people, only 4 COVID cases," and everybody was like wanted Jericho's head on a platter. They're ready to just chop his head off because of that.
Yep, essentially.
Yeah.
And then that infamously led to a certain video from our good friend Polana Productions called "I Can't Support Chris Jericho Anymore," where essentially, because Jericho ran this concert, Jake Roberts could have died of coronavirus. That was literally the video. So, there's this big
what I'll say
scandal
about this quickly. I didn't even answer your question. I'll say, you look at this and it's like, for me personally, I don't really involve myself in what a celebrity does with their personal life. It's not really my business.
Absolutely.
I don't really care. And then it comes out too that he's a Trump supporter, a Republican, and that was like 6 weeks later they were canceling Jericho again for that. And it's just like, why? Like, why do we care so much about what he's doing with his personal life? Like, that's his decision. That's those people's decisions that didn't wear a mask. That's on them. It's entirely up to them. That's their right. But for wrestling fans to just look at it and be like, "Oh yeah, Jericho doesn't deserve to be on to get a paycheck ever again because of this," not fair. It's not fair. I don't think.
Yeah, these people, like the Twitter cancellation crew is like demanding and like spamming Tony Khan, spamming AEW. Damn it, make Chris Jericho apologize for what he's done. Take Chris Jericho off TV, suspend Chris Jericho. And it's like, I mean, it's such a contentious one, Kevin. Like, politics meets wrestling. It's never a good thing. Like this situation, there was, I think, legit 2, notable cancellations. There was the Fozzy concert where masks weren't like really actively enforced, and then there was the whole thing with, Chris Jericho donating to Trump's son or whatever, and Chris Jericho having Trump's son on the podcast, and because Jericho, is in favor of the Trumps as opposed to the Bidens, therefore Jericho's the one of the worst people on earth. And it's like, as you just said there very well, it's not my business, it's not your business. Who gives a damn what Chris Jericho thinks, politically speaking? Everyone, political opinions and just opinions in general are like noses. Most people have them. So, it's just a mess, Kevin. So yeah, Chris Jericho got cancelled numerous times last year, and it was toxic every time it happened.
Oh my god, it was like incident after incident. It was like people are dragging up this record of Jericho donating to Trump's family, to the Trump, to the Trump organization, whatever you want to call it, for his political campaign. It's like, okay, why? Like, why? And then there was
I literally. I'm looking at it now. I made a video on November 5th, 2020. Chris Jericho is cancelled. It's just like all this stuff. Like, wow.
It's just controversy after controversy. I think the next controversy would be the NBA Twitter, right? The NBA Twitter versus God Jericho.
This was just
NBA Twitter versus Chris Jericho. One of the best views of 2020. Wow. That's crazy.
Jesus. So I'll walk you through this one. So basically, you get. It was legit the day. It was the day before. It was Christmas Eve, I believe. The exact date, I don't know, but it was Boston versus Milwaukee. I believe whatever happened with the game, I think Boston lost off. Like Tatum hit a big 3, and then Bucks won by a point from memory, I think. And then you got these like angry Boston fans. Like the game's just finished. Then following the NBA on TNT, Dynamite comes on, and AEW thinks it's a great idea to open the show with their biggest star, Chris Jericho. Totally cool. So Jericho walks out there for this inner circle like match or whatever they were doing exactly. Jericho walks out there, he removes his shirt, and all these angry Boston Celtics fans take to Twitter and just roast the crap out of this guy. Calling him Fat Jericho. What happened to AEW? What is AEW? This is a joke. This is a pissant rip off WWE. This is a joke. And naturally, because of how sensitive the AEW hardcore crowd is, like the hardcore fans, you had this massive just war on Twitter, war in the YouTube comments. Kevin, still to this day, 5 months later, I get a comment like a couple times a week regarding this on my Chris Jericho gets fat shamed video. People being like, well, Chris Jericho's in good shape for a 50-year-old, and then people being like, Chris Jericho's obese. Like, It's just like this thing. It's just.
It's
like, what do you think of it?
It's thinking
like,
of a mind of its own. I was looking at this, and my instant reaction was like, "This is what happens when casual, everyday, average people are exposed to pro wrestling in 2020." That was my thought, because you got a bunch of people. They're saying like, "What is this AEW, and why is Chris Jericho still wrestling? Like, did Chris Jericho wrestle in like 2003? Like, I haven't watched wrestling." People saying, "Oh, I haven't watched wrestling since 2005." Chris Jericho, he's all fat now. He's out of shape. Like, I remember when he used to look like a wrestler. And it was just like, wow. You know, it was really like exposing the culture of wrestling, I think, as a whole, honestly. Because the average NBA fan, or even the diehard NBA fan, they're probably not watching wrestling. Chances are they're not watching wrestling on Wednesday night. Okay. You know, this was a Tuesday night Dynamite too, right? This was right after the Tuesday night games on the NBA. It was like a 11 o'clock airing or a midnight airing or something.
It's like a 1 hour like Dynamite after the NBA, just to give like the thinking of it is we'll give the Dynamite some exposure following the NBA game, which that backfired severely. You know, you've got literally all these people just roasting Jericho. Then you have the body acceptance and body positivity crowd coming in saying Jericho looks better than all of you for 50. And like Jericho looks better at 50 than most of you do now. I'm like, bull crap. I'm like, personally speaking, my physique compared to Jericho it's there's no comparison. It's just like Jericho's obese compared to him. But they're like, that's just personally speaking. But you look at across the board, and it's like all these random NBA fans are just mostly just average like 30-year-old, 40-year-old guys. You know, they're not overweight. They're just like guys who play rec league basketball. They're a fan of the NBA. They're not these 400-pound fat slobs who. The body positivity is a mess of a situation. This is getting too political, pal. Let's move on.
Yeah, I completely forgot another controversy that we kind of glossed over too.
Oh God, spare me.
Completely, I forgot about the Sammy Guevara incident. Like that.
Oh God forbid as well. That's this one was a bit worse. I mean, to be fair, like if you want to go into that,
I'll just say. So back in the day, maybe like 5 years ago, when Sammy Guevara was an up and coming indie wrestler, when he was like he was a younger guy. Maybe not making the best decisions. He appears on a podcast and he makes some comments about Sasha Banks. That you all know what he said. I'm not even going to say it.
And terribly insensitive. Just don't have a really place in modern society. Yeah,
there's no place for it in society at all. So this kind of killed Sammy Guevara's push in AEW. Like they were in the middle of like Sex Gods, Jericho and Sammy. They were gonna challenge for the tag team championships in the near future. Like it was like you could see it, it was going to happen. And I think maybe this was kind of responsible for the Jericho Cassidy feud, because I'm thinking if the Sammy Guevara situation doesn't happen, they're doing a babyface turn with Sammy Guevara and they're having Jericho feud with Sammy Guevara in the summer of 2020. That's probably where they were going, because that's what it looked like, right? Like they were doing this where they were teasing like Sammy was getting a little bit tired of Jericho, Jericho's getting tired of Sammy. And then this whole incident happens, and it's like, wow, more controversy for Jericho,
Yeah, I mean, Jericho just lives with controversy. I mean, that sums up his literally second half of 2020. First half of 2020, Jericho was just everything to do with him was in the ring. And then seemingly the second half of 2020, outside of Les Dinner Debonair with MJF, seemingly everything else was quite literally outside of the ring. There was the Fozzy concert, the Sammy Guevara stuff, the fat shaming, the Trump stuff. Just literally, you couldn't go a few weeks without Jericho getting riling up the Twitter crowd.
Yeah,
and then
I laugh. I just laugh because it's just why how it's unlike any other business. Wrestling's unlike any other business. It's funny. But go ahead, finish your thought.
I still can't get over how defensive people get over Chris Jericho's physique. It amazes me. Like I kind of said this before, so I'm not going to just fully reiterate it. But Kevin, I made this video December 25th. I made this video Christmas Day. I dropped this, and it's currently right now April 30th. I'm still getting active comments and views on Chris Jericho gets fat shamed and roasted by NBA Twitter. Actively.
Yeah,
people are so obsessed with it. Go on.
It was a big deal. That's all I was gonna say. It was a huge deal when that happened. It was crazy.
Yeah, and I think that it's just you said it before, but it just goes to show how modern wrestling comes off. That made modern wrestling look so just amateurish and so just second rate. It's like, well, this is Chris Jericho, a guy who 15, 20 years ago, as we talked about in our bio last week, was the number, he was like an upper mid card type of guy. Now he's like the face of this promotion, and he's got a big gut. He looks out of shape, and you got NBA Twitter being like, "What is this, bro? What is this?" Like,
yeah, that's basically what it was. NBA Twitter, they're watching the Celtics, and they're like, "Oh, there's wrestling on. Okay, I'll check it out. I'll spend the first, it's Christmas Eve. I got nothing else better to do. There's a pandemic. Why not? I'll watch this wrestling show. AEW, never heard of it. They hear Jericho. They're like, oh, they hear Jericho's music. Like, oh, that's a good song. And they see Jericho come out. It's like, oh, I remember Chris Jericho from back in the day. I used to watch WWE when I was like 10 years old. I remember, Jericho versus Shawn Michaels. Yeah, Jericho versus Christian. I remember all that stuff. And then Jericho gets in the ring. He takes his shirt off, and they're just like, well, what is this?
LMAO, Jericho fat, OMG, AW sucks. What is this WWE jobber fed? Like,
yeah, they're like, what is this? Like, All Elite Wrestling? What is All Elite Wrestling? What is AEW? Is this I remember some people are tweeting, is this WWE? Does Vince McMahon own this? And it's like, wow, yeah, it put wrestling in its place in society. It really put a lot of things into perspective, honestly.
It was like, I kind of loved it because it was a great, like, kind of wake up call reality check, because a lot of people in the wrestling community live in a bubble, like a massive bubble, thinking that wrestling is really socially accepted and like they're cool because they love Aleister Black and all this kind of stuff, just generally speaking. Like they love these, like Cesaro needs to be world champions, like these type of people. And then a regular person who watches the NBA on Christmas Eve sees their Celtics lose and's annoyed, sees 10 minutes of this and then just goes, this is a joke. Jericho's fat. What is this joke? Like, it's funny. Like, it goes to show you what generally, non-wrestling fans see wrestling as. It was a fascinating little social experiment, I found.
Yeah, absolutely. It was. It was beautiful to watch unfold. It really was. It was just beautiful from a sense of like, it was just like, why is this happening?
Vindicating. I found it vindicating. It's like, everything I say is why wrestling is not cool. Everything you say, it's like, yeah, this is legit. This is just proof. This is, the wrestlers, the physiques of the wrestlers, just what wrestling comes off as.
Do you remember what Jericho was doing on that show? Was he in a tag team match? Was he in like a? Was he? It was
an opening tag match. I think it was Jericho and Guevara. It was some version of the Inner Circle against, I don't know who for the life of me, but yeah.
Yeah, that was like, watching that is like, wow, yeah. Then there was, the whole, I guess where we are now is the Inner Circle versus the Pinnacle. It's pretty much where we are in current Chris Jericho now in 2021.
I just really quickly to clarify that, it was the Holiday Bash, December 23rd, 2020. It was Jericho and MJF versus Top Flight. That was the match, just so no one has to correct us in the comments. So, yeah, now move us on, Kevin. Let's get into 2021. Let's round out Chris Jericho, pal. Let's go.
Here we are. We're pretty much in this, like, they did the segment in Vegas with MJF and the Inner Circle of Jericho. So pretty much the story being played off here is that Chris Jericho, he likes MJF, but the rest of his friends in the Inner Circle are like, MJF's bad news. He's going to turn on you, bro. And Jericho's like, no, MJF would never do that. No, he loves me. That's pretty much what the basis of the storyline was with MJF joining the Inner Circle. Am I right?
Yeah, for sure. Like the storyline, it was interesting because you have MJF who, like, I mean, he does stuff with Cody. He has his like fake little injury. He has a match with Jungle Boy at Double or Nothing 2020. Does stuff with Moxley, which we talk about AW booking with the world champions. MJF, I honestly feel like should have had a 3-month world title run and beaten Moxley it all out. I genuinely believe that. Considering where the AW product was from September through November of 2020, why not give MJF like a little teaser run of what to expect years down the line,
Yeah, like, absolutely.
Because compared to what we actually got, where it was legit Moxley and Eddie Kingston, and the whole storyline, the way Wrestling Jesus roasts this storyline never ceases to make me laugh. It's Eddie Kingston, and John Moxley's like, Eddie, I know your mother, Eddie. And Eddie Kingston's like, hey, whoa. And it's just, they're doing this whole storyline of Eddie Kingston's mom, and then it just, I don't know. MJF is champion for 3 months before he loses to Omega would have been cool, but nonetheless, MJF and Jericho, they do lay dinner debonair, one of the most pulverizing segments of 2020. Some people absolutely hated it, said it was corny, G-rated, all that kind of stuff. And some people loved it. So, Kevin, what did you think of it?
I thought it was fine. I thought it was good. I can't say it was great or bad. I just thought it was good. I enjoyed it for what it was. You know, then like when you look at the MJF Jericho storyline, it seemed just so predictable to me. It's really what I think about it. But what did you think about it? Like Dinner Debonair as a whole.
You could obviously see what they were going for. They're going for like a kind of theatrical type deal where they're singing. They're doing the long-winded exchange where Jericho's like, I want this type of steak. MJF's like, I want that type of steak, but with this. And Jericho's like, I want that type of steak he got, but with this and this. And then they do this back and forth exchange. They're calling the waiter the wrong name. And then they start like dancing around the table, and then they've got like the dancers there. And it was a memorable segment, which, as we've talked about in past shows, memorable is basically good at this point because the amount of wrestling you just forget because of just how uneventful it is. So it was memorable, but was it like God tier? No.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, for me, like I said, already predictable. You knew MJF was eventually going to turn on Jericho and show his true colors. I thought it was a more creative way they did it. In a way, like I don't remember too much from memory. What I remember is MJF. He gets pretty much caught at 4K by Sammy Guevara. Sammy has this video of MJF talking crap about Jericho, and Sammy's like, "See, I told you, bro. I told you MJF was no good." And that's pretty much how it went down, right?
I mean, yeah, quite literally. It's like, yeah, they do this like breakup, the dissension. We get that MJF Jericho versus the Young Bucks match at Revolution in 2021. Sloppy as hell match. Like people rate that 4.25 stars. God knows how, but nonetheless, just botches aplenty. A terrible match. So they do that, and then they do this breakup angle, and now I guess that leads us to the Pinnacle versus the Inner Circle, pal. MJF turns on Jericho, and I mean, anything else before we start to wrap this up, pal?
Yeah, really not much to say. We're gonna have Blood and Guts. We're gonna have Pinnacle versus the Inner Circle. Pinnacle is basically MJF's stable. We need another stable in AEW. And I can't get enough of them, pal. So it's MJF, it's FTR, Shawn Spears, Wardlow, Tully Blanchard, and then they're going up against the Inner Circle. And I mean, I find it interesting to an extent. Like I'll say this, I'll make this point to really end the podcast. I think they should have done Jericho and MJF, this whole storyline. They should have done this after Jericho lost the belt. Instead of if you knew that you were going to have MJF lose to Moxley, they should have just done MJF and Jericho in a non-title upper mid-card feud. And I think it would have...
Damn straight.
Yeah, it would have helped both guys' momentum. Because now both guys' momentum is just kind of dead. It's just realistically, the only people that care are just the people that love AEW no matter what they put out there. That those are the people that are really only invested in this MJF Jericho thing. It's just like Jericho doing more inside baseball references. He made a reference just this past Wednesday on Dynamite yesterday as we're recording this. I already forgot what he said, but I know he said something to MJF. Or was it Sammy Guevara? I'm sorry. Sammy Guevara called Shawn Spears a jobber, basically, in WWE. And that's kind of what we're doing now. It's still like the same corny WWE references that, like I said, were funny back in 2019 when Jericho did the bad idea for bad creative. But now in 2021, it's like, it's just not for me, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They've done MJF versus Jericho after that. I mean, definitely. It's like they could have had some fun with that. They could have done either that debate segment with Bischoff and had MJF debating Jericho. That would have been must see.
Absolutely.
Like MJF and Jericho going back and forth as Bischoff is moderating it as like the main event of a Dynamite. Like that would get ratings. Or like you could have had, MJF doing his like presidential campaign, and that like the whole campaign is to have, get a match with Jericho. Like maybe you have Jericho beats MJF in the first match, and then MJF has like a presidential campaign to get the rematch with Jericho at All Out or something. Like you can have fun with it, Kevin. Like it would have been pretty damn cool, and it would have been better than, let's do Jericho falling in orange juice.
Yeah, let's have Jericho take a vodka bath, pal. Yeah, I hope AEW learned their lesson that t-shirt sales don't necessarily transition to stardom, Like that was kind of the whole thing with Orange Cassidy. That was the justification that a lot of AEW fans were defending it for. It's like, oh, he sells T-shirts, so he's going to be a big star. It's like, not always the case. But yeah, back to...
Oh, he's so cool. He's over. Okay. Rightio. It's good. It's good we get the solar monster in AEW is over, pal. But yeah, so they do that, and yeah, I guess that kind of wraps it back full circle. Now we're at Blood and Guts 2021. Chris Jericho leading the Inner Circle into battle against the Pinnacle. So I guess just for the culture, Kevin, who do you think's winning that match?
I'll say the Pinnacle. The Pinnacle's gonna get the dub. You know, so that way the feud can keep going.
True. It's never gonna end, is it, pal? Long-term storylines, pal.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah. We make movies, damn it. Yeah. So I guess in closing, which era of Jericho would you say is more impactful for the wrestling business? His WWE run or his AEW / New Japan run?
I think. My initial reaction was, well, which WWE run, because he's had many, but at the same time, like when you put, I think it'd have to be his WWE run, and I'd probably pinpoint. I'd still look at it as Jericho's like 08 run, and everything he did in that time period was what is going to like define his career most. And like the main reason I back that up is because even though, yes, you know, being not solely responsible for AEW getting off the ground, but being like the pioneer of that is significant. When you look at how that's perceived by casual and mainstream fans, i.e. through the NBA Twitter thing, it's like it's only really tapping into like a real niche. But Jericho in like 08 and whatnot was like, he was setting the world ablaze when like literally about 5 to 6 times more people were watching. So that's my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a tough one. You know, if you're looking at purely impact on the wrestling bubble, the wrestling business, there's a case that his AEW / New Japan run is. I think a lot of people. I'd probably say most people listening to this podcast will side with his modern run, and they'll say that was more impactful. Just because, you know, it's Jericho, him going to New Japan, that famous vignette in 2017, basically he fathered this. You know, this AEW promotion in a lot of ways. He made it possible. And he brought competition to WWE. And I think a lot of people will be grateful to him for that. I think a lot of people will stick with Jericho forever for that. But then you look at the other side of it, it's like he was a big name in the Attitude Era. He beat Austin and Rock, and then he had his 08-09 run. Yeah, so it's really, I don't know, it's tough. You can make a case either way. And then I would say, I mean, his WWE run, you have to say by default is better because he had a near 20-year run in WWE, so I think you would have to say, like, who knows what he could do in AEW? Who knows how long he's going to be there? But that run in WWE was just crazy. But yeah, I mean, Jericho.
Many people saying Jericho should like hang it up supposedly and like just either turn to commentary or turn to being an on-screen personnel and not actually wrestling. Like, do you think that's fair? Do you think Jericho should wrestle for like only like a year more and then go into commentary, or like what do you think going forward with Jericho?
I think commentary is a natural fit for him. He's already one of the best podcasters in the world. You know, one of the most popular synonymous podcasters. He's really bridged the gap and he was one of the guys that helped make podcasting mainstreaming too. That's another thing that we could talk about if we wanted to, but there's really no need to. Nobody really wants to hear about that. But so naturally with that background, and then I think he would be a great commentator. Yeah, I think that's probably the way to go, I would say.
Well, like from what we've seen from Jericho as a commentator, like as has been the case of Jericho's whole career, as we've talked about over near enough like the 4 hours we've covered this guy in our 2 bios, literally the guy just gets the storytelling of wrestling. He gets the drama, he gets the soap opera, the reinvention, the character. Jericho gets that more than near enough anyone in wrestling history. And that's been seen with his reinvention over the course of a 30-year career. Like, I think that underpins Jericho, the performer, better than anything. Just how he's always had a finger on the pulse for 30 years. And commentary in that regard would be a perfect fit because he can tell the stories in a way that's logical, that makes sense, and that is good. Like, I'd rather listen to Chris Jericho for like a million hours straight than listen to Excalibur recite to me the moves of a match for 10 minutes, you know?
Absolutely.
Like, yeah.
Absolutely. I will end with this, with the GOAT debate, because a lot of people say Jericho is in the conversation for the GOAT. Do you think he's top 10 all time? Top 15, top 20, top 5, Mount Rushmore? What do you think, subjectively? In your opinion, your preference.
It's like, yeah, obviously there's a couple ways you can look at it. If you're looking at like whose apex was highest, I mean, Jericho, I don't think he's top 10. But you look at it as a wrestling career and just as a career in general, I think Jericho is objectively top 10 all time, just as a career with Reinvention, the amount of different stuff he's done. Because like you compare like a Jericho to a Steve Austin, for instance. Austin was literally like a massive peak from like 97 to 2001, 2002, which is like 5 years. And then it's just a plateau. It's just a big kind of dip either side. Whereas Jericho was basically a rise to like 1998 and then just this constant level of pretty good for literally over 20 years. So in that sense, I think as a career, Jericho is a top 10 career all time. As if you want to say he's a top 10 star all time, I mean, that one's really like debatable. But I think as a career, objectively top 10 all time, arguably top 5, or maybe even top 3 as far as a career. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think if we're talking careers, yeah, I mean, he's had a career that rivals John Cena's career, The Undertaker's career, Hulk Hogan's career.
Shawn Michaels.
Yeah, Shawn Michaels. Yeah, exactly. In terms of longevity, Jericho's career is second to none. It is. And it's not one of those instances where it's like with Randy Orton, it's a bunch of, WWE's just feeding him accolades for the sake of it. Jericho, he's never won a Royal Rumble. He's main evented, one WrestleMania. He's done, it's more organic with Chris Jericho.
Yes,
everything
exactly.
he does, whether it's mid-card, upper mid-card, main event, he makes it great. And it's always, you know that Jericho is going to deliver. He's going to give it his all. And I would say he's one of the best of all time. I think top 10 is pretty fair in terms of overall career. Like you look at star power, maybe not top 10. You might not be one of the 10 most recognizable wrestlers on the planet. He probably is one of the top, maybe 10, 15, I guess you could say. But yeah, he's one of the all-time greats nevertheless.
Absolutely. I think the fact that we got a 2-part bio out of him really attests to that. That's crazy. I mean, Chris Jericho, what a career. I'm sure there's still more to come because this guy never rests on his laurels. He doesn't just sit back and go, I did something really good 15 years ago. I'm going to live off that. Jericho's never gone into autopilot like that. Knowing Jericho, he never will. He's just going to keep churning out, Talk is Jericho's, keep performing with Fozzy, writing books. So we didn't even really mention that, and there's not really much to cover, but he's written several best-selling books, acting, potentially, commentary work. He's still doing stuff with AEW, bridging that gap with AEW and WWE, doing the Broken Skull Sessions interview. So much to cover in this guy's career. Hopefully we did that in fairly good detail. So yeah, any closing final words, Kevin?
Yeah, that's it. This has been the podcast of Jericho, pal.
Yep.
So we'll talk.
A late hate is Jericho, pal.
The late heat is Jericho, yeah. So yeah, I mean, what do we got next week on the horizon?
Next week, we've got one which we've already got in the can. We've got If Wrestling Was a Shopping Mall. So fresh off the success of if WWE was a high school, if AEW was a high school, if WWE wrestlers got real jobs, fresh off those, we've kind of brought it all into one, and we've got a hilarious video podcast for you guys. So if you're a fan of our kind of more funny stuff, you're gonna love it. But yeah, that should be great.
Yeah, that's it for us. So yeah, look out for that. It's gonna be a ton of fun. Great podcast coming up. If you listen to us on Apple or Spotify, leave a good review, all that good stuff, and we'll talk to you guys next Monday.